Sentire Media.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of A New Life in Italy. I'm your host, Samantha Wilson, and today we're diving into probably one of the most dangerous topics, one that has a huge risk of you getting completely lost down the Google rabbit hole, and that is how to buy a house in Italy. Now, if you've ever wondered how to even start the process, if you've been scrolling through dreamy stone villas on Idealista, for say, and have no idea what actually happens after you click the contact agent, then this episode is for you. I'm going to walk you through the entire journey from the initial search to negotiations to the final deed and what happens after you get the keys. And I'll also be sharing a real client story, someone who's used our property purchase assistance to find and buy her dream home in Italy. She'll tell us what worked, what she learned the hard way, and how life looks now. In fact, there's a little twist to her story that'll probably surprise you. So whether you are actively looking or just dreaming, this episode is packed with practical tips, eye-openers, and a few myths that I'm more than happy to bust. Are you ready? Let's get into it. I'm Samantha Wilson, Chief Dream Maker at smartmoveitaly.com, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show where each week I take you behind the scenes of what it's really like to move to Italy, introduce you to some fascinating people, answer your questions, and show you how starting a new life in Bel Paese is possible for you. All right, welcome back. Now, if you are buying a property in Italy, either you're planning to move here and live here, use maybe as a holiday home, or as an investment, there is no denying that Italy has a ton of options. In fact, there's so many that most people get a little lost at the very beginning, the search. So let's start there. If you are from US or Canada or UK or Australia, you're probably used to a centralized listing where agents work together. And I'm referring to an MLS, a multiple listing service where all available properties are neatly located in one database and where agents share properties, their details, quite willingly actually, and buyers can search and share the properties that they are interested in with their agents until, of course, they find their perfect home. Well, welcome to Italy, where things are not quite the same. You see, in Italy, there is no national MLS system. Every agency has its own listings, and most of the time, agents don't share properties. Yes, there are exclusive listings where an agent will sign an agreement with the seller to represent them only, and this, of course, is good and bad, both for the agent and for you. It's good for the agent, but bad for the buyer who wants independent representation. And what do I mean by that? Well, in Italy, there are two approaches to buying a property. Number one, you can directly contact the listing agent, which means that you're scrolling through and you send an email to that agent on a property that you're interested in. And this means that that agent will be representing both you, the buyer, and the seller, which, of course, if you're a foreigner, is not always the best idea. Now, the downside to this is that you will not be represented independently. And although the agent that you're working with has a legal responsibility to represent your best interests, it's not always possible. And often foreigners can get the bad end of the deal, especially if they don't understand the process and the quirks and the language and, of course, the potential problems. The other reason is that the agent wants to sell only their listings, not other agents' listings. And why is that? Well, because they get commission from both the seller and the buyer, usually at about 4% each. So if they work with another agency, then they will get commission usually only from the seller. So of course, that's half. And this is why if you speak to a local agency, they will say, and you tell them all your criteria, they will say, oh no, sorry, there's no properties in your search criteria, nothing available. Now, of course there is, but they, that agency, simply don't have anything more to show you. So you have to do the legwork. You have to walk around and speak to all of the different agents and agencies in that area until you finally find the property that you like. Now, you could and are likely missing a huge chunk of properties that are actually available. And this is one of the biggest problems about buying from overseas or buying as a foreigner, is you just don't understand how the system works. And when you're dealing with local agents, sometimes they're slow to respond. They don't speak the language, don't really understand you, or customer service here is a little bit different. So it can become really quite frustrating. Now, local agents are very valuable for a lot of reasons. One being that they are connected to the area and will know off-market properties. These are unlisted properties that you can't find online. And sometimes they can find their little gems, just sort of a friend of a friend or somebody local is thinking, maybe if the right offer comes in, I'll sell my house. So local agents are really valuable for that, and it's good working with them. But it's usually better to have also independent representation, like either a property lawyer once you found a house, or better yet, a buyer's agency that will access all the properties, all the agents, speaks your language, knows the questions to ask, and will keep you safe from potential problems. Now, of course, we have a buyer's agency, but this podcast isn't to promote that. It's just to give you the information that there's options for you, that you can have independent representation from someone else that can think only about what you're looking for and that has access to all of the properties as opposed to just the ones that local agent is representing. Now, the other reason is that Italian websites for properties, for example, the independent ones, are generally kind of terrible. So these are the local agents' websites, and you've probably seen them yourself. The pictures are horrible, and they're often out of focus, or there'll be just a great big picture of a sofa or a vase in the middle of the room. Not at all the actual house or anything that is of value to you to understand what the property is all about or where it is. And often they're out of date. So they're not exactly perfect, and the properties might not be even listed or advertised properly in so far as giving you the correct information. Agents, if they don't speak English, their translation in Google Translate can be misleading. And also, it can be hard to find out where the property is. And that's because listing agents don't want other agencies to find out where the property is, in fear of the, tipping off the other agency, and they will go and contact the owner directly and try to scoop the property and get an exclusive, or even just list the property as a second agency. This is a behavior that happens all the time here in Italy. So when you're looking online and you're thinking, why aren't they giving me the address so I can Google Earth it? Well, the reason is either they just don't want to put it in, don't know how to put it in. It could be a data entry issue. But more than likely, it's because the agent does not want to share the data with other agencies, not necessarily with you. And of course, they want you to contact them. I always consider it kind of like the wild, wild west here when you talk about real estate. And sometimes, when you're dealing in that environment, you just have to kind of hang on and go with the flow. Now, there are larger portals in Italy, although they're not MLS. They're quite popular, and they have a lot of listings like Immobiliare.it or Idealista or even Casa.it. But often you will need to get more creative and dig even deeper, like checking local Facebook pages or foreign agency websites. What's really important to know is that if you're working with a buyer's agency, to always tell your personal agent, this is the person you're working with, about the property that looks interesting, and never to contact the listing agent. Now, this can confuse the process quite a lot, because if you contact the listing agent, when your agent contacts them on your behalf, they will say, I'm sorry, they're already my client. They've been contacting me already. So you have to commit to either working with a lot of different agents all the time, trying to dig and do all the legwork yourself, or with one buyer's agent or one person who is representing you and doing all of the legwork for you. You can't have it both ways. All right, so let's say that you've found a place. It checks all the boxes and you're ready to make an offer. Now, I'm going to jump over the viewing trip because I covered this in great detail in episode 44 of this season. So check back and have a look. Now, let's talk about what happens after you find the house of your dreams, because here's where things get really interesting and where the cultural disconnect is most obvious. Yes, the process of searching and finding is a lot longer than you may expect. But when it comes time to buy the property, most foreigners expect the seller to be super available and active in the process. All right, let's say that you found a place. It checks all the boxes and you're ready to make an offer. Now, I'll jump over the viewing trip because I cover that in a lot of detail in episode 44 of this season 3. And now, though, I want to talk about what happens after you find the house of your dreams, because this is where things get really interesting and often where the cultural disconnect is most obvious. Yes, the process of searching and finding is longer than you may expect. But when it comes time to buying the property, most foreigners expect the seller or even the seller's agent to be very available and active in the process. And it's kind of confusing when they go silent. You always ask yourself, my goodness, I'm here, I'm ready to buy the house. Why are they taking so long to make a decision? Why do they have to talk to everyone in the family before they can answer? And that's because negotiating in Italy is not really cut and dry back and forth. There's this etiquette involved, processes, and most of them take a very long time. Now, the most valuable tip that I can share with you is that in Italy, no news is not bad news. Unlike in North America, where if someone goes silent and doesn't respond to you, that means they're not interested in anything you have to say. In Italy, no news just simply means there's no news, which is brutally painful for a foreigner. That silence. Oh my God, they haven't answered my email in 1, 2, 3 days. No updates. It's super, super painful. But if you remember that no news just simply means there's nothing to share, you can be a little bit more relaxed. So you have to wait and be patient. You have to stay on top of your agent, but trust that they know the process and often the delicate communication that may have to happen to get maybe that one cousin to agree to a deal that the rest of the family doesn't want. Piano, piano, slowly, slowly. This process doesn't move fast here. And also, contrary to rumors, you do not lowball the seller and expect a counter. In fact, if you lowball them, they probably will just walk away or not answer you at all. And that's not an exaggeration. I remember once we had a client who wanted to work with us, of course, and what they had heard, they told us that they firmly believed that they should never offer more than half of the asking price and insisted on this strategy because they were also agents from New York, so they had an idea that they thought they knew about how property worked in Italy. So, for example, if a property was 500,000 euros, they said they would never offer more than 250, so half the price. And of course, we didn't accept them not because we didn't, want to help them get the best price possible, but because we want them to succeed. And this approach of lowballing property here in Italy does not work. I'll say it again, it does not work. Now, yes, you should offer less, often less than the asking price, but not half of the price. And you have to listen to your agent and listen to the circumstances in order to have a strategic approach. Because lowballing is not acceptable in Italy and will only get the door shut really hard in your face. There's no way that you'll get past that. So you need someone local or highly experienced to help you structure an offer that's fair but also strategic. Now, there's always a story, a history, a want, a need, or an expectation of the seller. And if you're a foreigner, they probably think you have more money, maybe more money than you do. So there's a little bit of an uphill battle. Now, sometimes it's realistic and sometimes it's not, but it has to be learned and honored and planned in order to negotiate a proper deal. Did you see the movie Under the Tuscan Sun, where that one scene where there were those two people, the main character and another family, who were negotiating on the spot with an old woman to buy Bramasole? The negotiating was going back and forth, and there was a pigeon that flew into the house and pooped on the main character. And the old woman said, "Oh, it's a sign, it's a sign." So she sold it to the main character. Well, yeah, that's just a movie, and it's not about a pigeon pooping on you. But it's not that far from the truth, insofar as that Italy isn't just transactional. It's not a country or a culture that is just, what do you have? Let me buy it and let me move on to my life. It's relationship-based. And the moment that you embrace this key difference, that Italy is not transactional only, you will find your life and your home purchase, goes a whole lot smoother. Now, once your offer is accepted, you are going to sign a preliminary contract and pay a deposit. This is about 10%, maybe up to 30%. It really depends on the property. And it's a binding contract, which means that if you change your mind and end and pull out and do not continue with the sale, then you will lose that deposit, obviously. And in fact, they can sue you to buy the whole house. Now, if the owner decides that they change their mind and don't want to sell you anymore, they will owe you your deposit twice. So they'll have to pay you double. And don't forget, you also need a plan on actually how to pay. So without a bank account, international transfers can be really tricky and slow and expensive. And a lot of people think they need to open an Italian bank account to buy a house. You do not need to do that. Now, we guide clients, of course, through currency exchange, but you can learn more about how to do that on episode 18 in season 2, where I speak with Rachel Canales, who is an expert on all of this. But the big takeaway is that you do not need to have a bank account in Italy in order to buy a house. So now that you've searched and you've negotiated and you're ready for the final deed, what happens? Well, after you have the preliminary contract, then you have to go to the notaio stage. Now, this is a neutral legal officer, not necessarily your advocate, but they do the full check on the property, the ownership, the boundaries, the permits, the debts, all of these things that are attached to the property. And it can take several weeks for this to happen. Now, these people are government officials, and you as the buyer get to pick your notaio. And they will be the person that eventually transfers the deed into your name. Now, once everything is cleared by the notaio, you will sign the final deed. And you'll do that in the notary's office. And then you own a property in Italy. Now, if you don't speak Italian, then you will have a proxy. I mean, yes, you can translate all the documents, but 99.9% of the time, it's better to have someone that you've given the power of attorney to that speaks both English and Italian, and they can sign on your behalf. This is called a proxy or just the power of attorney. And it's a really good idea, especially because sometimes you won't be here on the signing of the deed, and you don't have to be if you have a proxy. Of course, you can be, but you'll just be sitting there smiling for the pictures while the power of attorney actually does the signature. Now, almost all foreign buyers use proxies, so unless, of course, you speak Italian. If you speak Italian, you don't need one. But wait, hang on, there's just a little bit more. Because after you have signed the deed and the property is yours, you still need to register the property in the tax office. Actually, the notaio does that. And it has to be registered also in the land registry, which can take a few weeks to sometimes a month. And remember this timing, because if you need the registered deed for your visa application, for example, you need to wait a few weeks before you get it. So don't think that, you're going to sign the deed on a Monday and you're going to apply for your visa on Tuesday. You will need some time to get all of the documents in order. And second, you'll need to transfer the utilities, the ownership of the utilities. In most cases, utilities aren't just shut off like they are in other countries. They're still active, but you just actually do a transfer of the name of the utilities. And it's not always straightforward because some properties may have utilities in it, and sometimes you may need to change them over or add utilities if you're buying a rural property that maybe you want to change the heating, for example. Now, utilities in Italy are a disaster. Bottom line, you will need some help. It's very challenging to do, and utility providers really don't speak English. So unless your agent or the previous owner will give you a hand, you really need to hire somebody to help you with that. And I know it feels like it's kind of an extra piece that you might be used to doing yourself, but trust me, spend the money on having somebody to help you move over your utilities. It is really a difficult process. And then finally, you have to pay your property tax, or at least set up your property tax payments. And you can do this after the deed is registered. I strongly recommend having a commercialista, which is like a local CPA here in Italy, like an accountant here in Italy, set all of your tax accounts up for you. And also, I would suggest asking them if they have a little package or something that where they can make all the payments on your behalf. Because it's easy to forget when to make them, how to make them, and it can get confusing, especially if it's a second home and you're not here. And I've left the link to a commercialista in our show notes so that you can contact him if you want, if this is your situation, you need some help. And maybe you also might need to think about getting a property manager or maybe just a helpful neighbor to keep their eye on the property if you're not living there full time. I mean, as a whole, Italy is quite safe, but there are reports, sometimes kind of a lot of reports in the South in particular, of break-ins on vacant second homes, vacant properties. And so it's really nice to have somebody who's close by just to keep an eye out. All right, so now that we've laid the groundwork and walked you through step by step of the search and the negotiation and then the buying of the property, I think that we need to talk to somebody who's actually done it. So today, my special guest is Sarah Wieland, and she is also a fellow Canuck, and she has been living in Italy for 3 years. And she's someone who made her dream of living here a reality before Brexit, because she's also a dual British citizen. So all of her visa issues were non-existent. And of course, back then, Canadians were able to buy property in Italy without any problems. So I'll explain that in a little bit in the interview. But Sarah and I first met when she joined our boot camp a few years ago. I think it was around COVID time. And she started preparing for her big move. And our team, of course, helped her make the move, but also find her new home in this sweet little town in southern Tuscany. Now, some of you may have seen her featured on our YouTube channel. Yes, that house with that very cute little terrace. But today I wanted to sit down with her and hear her full story. What brought her to Italy, how she handled the changes and the challenges of buying in a foreign country, and what life looks like now that she's settled into her new home. Sarah's journey is both inspiring, but really very honest and full of insight for anyone who's thinking, could I really do this? Well, hello, Sarah. I'm so happy to talk to you this morning.
Hi, Sam. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, listen, before we get started, I want you to go back to the beginning. Because you and I met many years ago. You are just like me, Canadian and British, and moved over to Italy before Brexit. So your visa issue was a non-issue, and your Canadianness, as people may know, being a Canadian right now, you can't buy property in Italy until you become a resident. So all of those things weren't a problem, many years ago. But tell me at the beginning, what first inspired you to buy a home in Italy?
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with the fact that I knew that I wanted to live here. Obviously, being able to have a home base where I could explore more parts of this amazing country was really important. And also, I think maybe just the time in my life where I had just sold a house in Canada, which of course many people know most property here costs a lot less, depending where you look, really, but most of it costs less than in Canada. And so I thought, how can I make my Canadian dollar go a long way? Is it better to rent, or is it better to just find my forever place and buy and live mortgage free? So I think that was a big part of it.
Right. And something there's no way that could be possible in Canada.
No
right?
way. I would never have been able to do it there. So the gift it has given me of time and less stress here is incredible.
Right. Okay. So one of the biggest questions we get all the time is, where should I live in Italy? And I always equate it to like a kid in a candy store, because there is so many amazing places. There are incredible cities and towns and villages. And I know where you ended up. So tell me about where you are and what you did, or how did you narrow down where you exactly wanted to live? Did you find the property first, or did you narrow down the location? Let me know how that happened.
Sure. So I live in a town called Pitigliano, which is spelled with a mysterious G in there. So it's spelled Pitigliano. And it's in the very, very southern part of Tuscany. So southern that we're only 4 or 5 kilometers from the Lazio border. So we're in a lovely mixed area in the zone that they call Maremma, which is very famous for being close to the sea, but having all of the other lifestyle pluses, which I consider them pluses, of being in the hills as well. So olive oil, wine, all those delightful things. So already that is kind of a no-brainer that it's a great choice. I made a list, actually, Sam. I think you suggested it, and I love lists, so I went for it. And I made a list of everything that I had to have in this new life that I wanted, and how the house was going to help me do that, and then what I would like to have, and then what would be sort of dream. And I started wide in all of Italy, looking at how those places could fulfill that. And I narrowed down into this area after a few months of searching. And that was online, but also making 2 or 3 trips here. And I found this whole area that's based around the Lake of Bolsena, which is a very organic area. Most of us who move here are foodies, I'm assuming, right?
Right.
And it's known,
yeah.
Exactly. And it's known for its organic produce, its sustainability, things like that. And so I actually came to Bolsena, which is about 20 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to take a little side trip to Piciliano. And then I thought, wow, I should look at houses here too. So I made a little list, and I saw houses in Piciliano and in Bolsena, and ended up luckily in Piciliano.
Right. So you did it you didn't do it based on, I want 2 bedrooms, a house with a garden, in this budget and this kind of character. You actually did it, I want this kind of lifestyle. This is the kind of life I want to lead. And these are the things that make me happy. And now let's find the location. And then in the location, let's find the house.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I had in mind some of those basic things like budget, of course, very important. And that I knew I wanted more than 1 bedroom so I could host my family when they came to visit. But it was more, I wanted to start with the dream list. I wanted to start with what I was going to feel like when I woke up every day, instead of just did I tick boxes for the structure of the house. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So before you started the process, how long did it take you? Let's start with that.
Oh, well, I've been dreaming about living in Italy since I was a child, so it's quite a while. And then from the very beginning of the process was right after I finished your boot camp. I think I was the first boot camp ever, wasn't I? Online, at least.
Yeah, around COVID time, I think it was.
Yeah, very beginning, yeah. I had actually just come back from Italy during COVID, so I was like, how do I get back there? And then I joined the boot camp, and I realized what I had to do to get residency, but then also how to buy property. And as you know well, looking for property online can be quite confusing when you're doing it by yourself. So I did see Smart Move's property purchase assistance program, and not speaking Italian, not being a lawyer, not understanding the legal ramifications, and the fact that I was sending my life savings across the world just made me go, this is an investment that I can't pass up. I need help, and it's worth it. It's worth it. And pretty much everyone I've talked to who's had some help in some way or other from anybody has said it is worth it every single time.
Yeah, so. I think that's a really great takeaway. It doesn't have to be us, and it doesn't have to be, a full-on buyer's agency. Even if you have family or somebody who you trust that knows the system, speaks the language, and can help you through the process, you just need the help. It's just a no-brainer, really. I mean, you absolutely need to have it. So before you started the process, though, how long did the actual buying process take from the time you said, okay, I have the money, I am ready to buy, until you actually found the property that you liked? Did you see a ton of properties?
I did. I saw probably about 20. I went on a road trip with my mom and my dad. we drove through Umbria, all of Tuscany, and a bit of Lazio. Yeah. And then when I narrowed it down to this area and saw 2 houses that I really liked, I made a pros and cons list for those houses. And then I contacted you guys and said, I'm ready to make an offer on this house. And so I would say I started that process in March, and I was with the keys in my hand at the end of July. So it wasn't long. I expected it to be longer.
Yeah, that's actually not bad at all, because sometimes, as we talk about a lot with buying property, the buying process here is similar. You go for a search, you find a house, you love it, you want to make an offer, you want to buy it. Those steps are all kind of the same. It's all the in-between that can be a little bit quirky here. So when you started this process, were you worried about anything, or were you just taking it step by step?
Yeah, I mean, I was worried about hidden fees. I was worried about not understanding. I was worried about having to pay thousands of dollars to get documents translated if I didn't have anybody who could help me. A lot of those aspects, but the more legal document bureaucracy aspects were really what worried me.
Yeah. And were there any surprises or problems, like roadblocks along the way? Was this the first house you made an offer on?
This was the first house I made an offer on, which I think is because I had kind of front-loaded all of the decisions following your advice about what to look for abusive houses, for sketchy documents. And so I was very careful before I decided to even take the next step. So I was lucky in that way.
Right. So you didn't chase the one that you knew was probably not right. You didn't. And people do that a lot. It's like, oh, but I really, we want what we can't have sometimes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and they spend so much time just trying to make it work, or have that idea that, well, for me, I can make anything happen, and I'll fix this property so that I can buy it. But in Italy, things just don't work that way.
No, they really don't. And I suppose maybe one that was a little bit surprising was that there was no house inspection. So, my house, most of it is from the 1220s.
Yeah.
So it's a
Fairly new.
completely different world. It's much, much older than Canada as a country. Yeah. And so I was like, how is the roof? Does anyone know? Does anyone know the answer to that question?
Yeah. You know what? We always get the question almost every single time. Foreigners, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, usually, besides how much is it, is how old is it? And agents always have this. It's hilarious to look at their face, the Italians, because they're like, "Boh, I don't know." It's, I don't know, 13th century. Like, how old is it? Or they'll say, oh, no, it's new because, it was built in the 40s or 30s or something, right? Because it's fairly new for Italy. But your point about the inspection, I think, is a really good one because, again, that's bringing what you know to Italy that doesn't, we don't do it the same way here. So we do have inspections, by the way, if people are listening, but they're not the same. So they're not going through with that big binder, checking off every single piece of your house and giving you a report at the end of the day. They're doing little things like, tell me, did you have anybody look inside the house at all? Or was it just you and Luca?
No, I went through, we also had the agent here who was helping me as well. And she had some information about the story of the house because the family that used to own this part of the house still owns the part below me. So that was nice to be able to speak with them as well. But you've said this a million times and I'm going to echo it again. It is all about who you know here, especially if you can get somebody local. And so I had a friend who knew a geometra and he came by. You know what I mean?
Excellent,
it was just enough just to give me peace of mind.
Right. But not that deep dig into the property. And often what we do with the inspections isn't just necessarily structurally with the property, but it's actually the documentation that they're taking a look at. The survey, making sure that the plan, that where you're standing inside the house is exactly what it looks like drawn on a piece of paper, which in most cases it's not.
No.
How was yours? Was yours regular or did you have to make some changes?
No, it was regular. This house had been on the market for several years, I think. So at some point somebody mentioned that they should do that, I think, so in order to make it easier to sell.
Easier to sell. Oh, that's lucky. Well, I mean, you had all those things, in your favor because most of the time there's got to be a tweak or two to the property. So tell me about what happened. I know I want to talk money, but not personal. I don't want to get too personal with you. Did you find it complicated to handle that financial side of the purchase? Can you walk us through that piece of the process?
So I decided to have a budget that was slightly less than what I was able to afford in order to have a little bit of money on the side in case there were unknowns, in case the roof did need redoing. And the biggest problem for me is I didn't know how to get the money here. And I didn't know how to not lose so much of it in the change from Canadian to euro.
Because that's painful.
That was the stress, yeah. And so on one of your podcasts, you had mentioned a financial group that was helpful, and they are based in London, I think. And I contacted them. Yeah, you probably remember the name. I don't, sorry. And they were super helpful. And they basically said, this is how much it'll cost. We hold it here until you're ready. And then the notary will take it. I did not have an Italian bank account at that time. So basically I just waited until everything was ready and they had it. They sort of held it for me. And then they sent it over to the notary to finish the process at the time. Yeah. And so it was a big choice, but it worked out really well.
For sure. And a lot of people feel, or actually a lot of Italian agencies that don't work a lot with foreigners and that only work with Italians, they think you need a bank account here in order to buy a house, which isn't true. Because what people maybe don't realize is that when you get to that offer phase of the buying process and you give your deposit, often what happens if there's no conditions to the offer, that deposit goes directly to the seller immediately. It's not held in escrow always, not always held in escrow to closing. They actually get the money because the contract's binding, which in some cases can feel a little nerve-wracking. And in some cases, we try to hold those funds in escrow just for an in case. But ultimately, legally, the owner is due the money anyway. But in Italy, what happens is because they have bank accounts, they write a check. And that check is given to, just handed over to the owner at the time of the acceptance of the offer, and the owner cashes it. But if you don't have a check, how are you going to get the money to the owner? So what happens often is it's put in escrow or put in your notary's bank account like you had described, and then eventually released by the notary to the seller. So it's a little bit different of a process. But you did mention up some fees. So one thing I want to just quickly take the time, to hijack your interview here, but to take the time to let everyone know that there are costs to that.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a bank account in Italy and you are, say, giving your deposit to the notary who will then hold that money, not GC Partners, the transfer company that you spoke of, but the actual notary, that notary will charge you fees to hold that money, 300, 500. I think the maximum is about 800, 850 euros, depending on how much they're holding. So you have to be prepared for that as well. It feels weird. It's like, if I gave you a check, you're not going to charge me any money. Why do I have to pay you just to put it in your bank account? It's weird.
It's true. I found it was really interesting when Luca was finding me a notary, because they were bidding for my business to close the sale. Yeah. And I had a choice of 3. Obviously, being in Pitigliano, it's quite far away from any major center. So, it had to be 3 people who were willing to come here and to work with us to finish the sale. And they had those types of things, the list of fees and why they were charging them. And that was interesting to learn about. Mm-hmm. And one of them had that fee on there. And I went, no, I don't need that. Yeah, I've got GC Partners. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. The notary is, you could have a choice. Not everybody has a bunch of choices depending on where they are, but certainly they can. And if they don't worry or don't have a time crunch, they can dig around for other notary. But the nice thing about having a choice is that they get to bid. So you can save a little bit of money choosing, obviously, a good notaio, but one that is going to charge less. It's always, every penny counts when you're buying a new house.
For sure. And speaking of pennies and taxes, if we just talk about taxes for a second here, another thing I had to keep reiterating was that this was a first home for me.
Yes.
Because obviously in the documentation that changed a lot in regards to taxes and everything. And people assumed, probably because I was Canadian, that this was a second home, or a foreigner, it was a second home. And I did have to say several times and keep my eye out to make sure that they were always writing first home.
Yeah,
really good. If not, they default to the second, and that would obviously change my situation a lot.
Right, because what you're talking about is prima casa, and prima casa is your first house. And in Italy, when you buy, not the first house you've ever bought in Italy, but the first house you're going to take your residency in. So if you're planning to move to Italy, you have 18 months to establish your residency. But what that means is, instead of paying 9% transfer tax on the purchase price or on the cadastral value, you pay 2%. So there's a big difference between 2 and 9. Yeah. And you also don't have to pay the yearly property tax. So there's, over the course of time, it's pretty big savings. But you're absolutely right. They always, with a foreigner, always default to a second home. So it's a good tip to add.
Great. Yeah. I want to save everybody that stress. I was like, no, first. Yeah.
What? Why are you moving to Italy? That's what they ask
Trust me, I'm moving.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so now that you have moved and you're living in your cute, gorgeous little house there, what's one piece of advice that you wish someone had told you or had given you before you even started?
Ooh, I think don't stress about finding the home exactly how it is, how you want it from that very first moment. Just make sure that it has enough of what you want for your life to sort of feel like you're living here in Italy. I didn't want something that was modern inside. I wanted it to be pretty old, so that when I opened my eyes in the morning, I didn't suddenly think I was still in Canada. Until I walked outside, I wanted to feel that way while I was inside the house. But just set aside a little bit of money, like keep some of your budget aside to personalize it and to add those little touches. But if you go around thinking you're going to find the perfect thing with all of these old houses, that's exactly what you want. I mean, you could get discouraged really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to just be like, well, if I just had a little bit of something here where I could change it, for costing much less than it does in Canada,
Right. Yeah.
then that could actually become your dream home quite quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's probably leans into the fact that when you buy property in Italy, you will be in that property or use that property for quite some time because
Yeah.
things don't sell super fast here. It's not a market where you buy and you fix and you flip because
No.
there's taxes and there's all kinds of situations why you don't do that. So, you know, you have to, it's a long game, right? Buying in Italy, it takes a long time, but it also means it's an investment for a very long time. So you can turn something that has the bones and has the location and has that lifestyle that you first talked about and then, you know, mold it into more what you really want at the end of the day.
Exactly. And then the people around you will learn some really cool things that we do in other parts of the world, like pot drawers in a kitchen. It's a revolution here in Pitiliano, I tell you.
How is that with the community? Do you love it there still? I mean, what is
do.
life like now that you're there for a while? How long have you been there now?
So here for 3 years now.
Okay.
Full time, and it's great. I mean, when you move from a city to a town of 3,000 people, it is a major change.
Yeah.
There is no going to the grocery store in your pajama pants. You can't do.
Oh,
not that I want to,
goodness.
but you know, you can't.
Wet hair and pajama pants. I
know.
you banished.
I know.
You're gone.
They still point at me because I still do the wet hair thing. But
Oh, no.
that's okay. They're like, you're gonna be so sick. I'm not
You're
sick.
gonna
It's
die.
fine. I promise.
You'll be
I'm fine.
paralyzed.
Yes, exactly. Tomorrow, your neck will be broken. But
Yeah.
it's great recognizing people. It's great having rhythms. It's great sitting in the piazza lamenting about really small, tiny municipal things. You know,
You have become
look,
Italian.
those garbage cans haven't been emptied often enough these days. Oh, now we have to pay the $140 tax this year. Ooh.
You become Italian so fast.
It's true.
Well, you know, my final question was going to be, would you do it all over again? But it sounds like you would.
Oh, yeah. That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, great chatting with you again and amazing tips and advice. Thank you, Sarah. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Sam. It was absolutely enjoyable and super, super fun. I hope everybody enjoys it and that they all get to move to Italy like me.
Yay. Ciao, ciao. All right. Well, what a great story. I always love talking to Sarah. It's always so much fun. Now, the little surprise that I didn't tell you is that Sarah actually now is working for Smart Move Italy Property. In fact, this happens a lot with us. We meet hundreds and thousands of people actually over the years that we've helped, live their dream here in Italy. And actually quite a few of them are part of our team here now at Smart Move. And her job is actually, she collaborates with all of these different agencies all around Italy because as a buyer's agency, it's important to form all these relationships. So that's what she does. And you'll probably see her on our Instagram channel, on the Smart Move Italy Property Instagram channel, which I will leave a link in the show notes. So it's always fun to talk to Sarah. All right, so I want to end this with some helpful tips for you guys. First of all, the first thing I want to talk to you about is buying for sale by owner, FSBOs, as you might be calling them in your home country. It is not a problem to do that here in Italy. As a matter of fact, if you walk through the streets, you will probably see signs that say vendita. This means house for sale. And that often means that the owner is selling it privately, and they want to do this, of course, is just like you do in the home country, to save on commissions. And it's not a bad idea if you are a foreigner, you can certainly do that. But what you need to make sure that you do, and you need to budget for it, if you're wanting to buy for sale by owner directly to the seller, you may be thinking you're going to save some money, but I need you to urge you to think that you still need to have some help. So you're probably not going to save much money on commissions because if you don't have an agent, then you absolutely need to have a property lawyer. Buying independently in Italy, if you are not Italian, if you are a foreigner, is a very dangerous thing to do. There are many things that can go wrong in the transfer of the deed. There can be old tax debt on the property, or worse, some missing random family member can suddenly show up claiming the rights to your property. So you really need to be independently represented. So my first tip is if you do want to buy, directly from the owner, that's fine. But make sure either you have an agent that works for you on your side, independently representing you, or if not, go to a property lawyer. Now, number 2 is assuming that cheap means easy in Italy. So that 60,000 euro countryside house, or of course, all those little €1 homes all over the place, might seem like a really great deal, and you can get in cheap and easy, which maybe comparing to your home country, it is cheaper. But that property probably needs a lot of money, 100, 150,000 in renovations. It probably has no permits. There's abuses that are in it that you will need to repair. And all of a sudden, you might even be responsible for any of those last debts that are on the property. So although things are more affordable here, you do still get what you pay for. So don't fall in the trap of thinking that just cheap is cheap and a good deal. Often you get what you pay for, and cheap ends up being quite expensive for you. And then the last thing I want you to think about is try not to think too much or compare too much of what the buying process is like back home. And if I have any realtor listeners out there that think, you've been in real estate for many, many years, you know the process and can handle it here, I can tell you that, yes, you know the buying process in your home country, but it is truly different here in Italy. So although you should bring your knowledge and bring your experience with you, try to set it aside throughout the process and realize that things just work differently here. Timelines are different. Paperwork is different. Negotiations are way more emotional. You'll need patience, and you'll definitely need some guidance because the steps are also different. You could, Italy could be your lifelong dream, and of course, one of the biggest investments that you make in Italy. So take your time and do it right, and make sure you have this support. And if you're serious, set realistic timelines. Don't start looking until you have your money prepared. And if you found a property that you love and you can make an offer on it, then that's the time to start looking, not before. It's not a good idea to start looking, and then after you find the property you love, you have to now work out how you're going to pay for it. Mortgages for foreigners in Italy are almost impossible to get, not completely, but practically impossible. And most agents won't work with you if you're a foreigner that needs a mortgage. So organize your funds in your home country first and know how much you can afford. Know that the closing costs will probably be about 10% of the asking price. It's a good gauge. It's maybe a little high, but it's a good way to estimate. And start speaking to currency exchange people like Sarah spoke about, to make sure you have that all in place, because it can really save you thousands and thousands of dollars that you might spend otherwise. And get your team in place early, because you don't want to be scrambling around once you find that perfect house, because although properties don't sell as fast as they may in your home country, a very good property in a very good area at a very good price, it will sell. There will be other people buying it because it is competitive here in Italy, and there are a lot of foreigners that are out here looking for property. I think it's something like 60 or 70,000 foreign property buyers do complete real estate transactions in Italy every year. So that's a lot of competitors out there for you. So if you're ready to buy, get everything in place and then start your search. It's time for listener questions. Just like the old radio call-in shows, my team has picked 3 listener questions, all left on our voicemail. I have no idea what these questions are, but I haven't been stumped yet. Are you ready? Let's get started. All right, it is question time. Let's start with question number 1. Can I buy a property in Italy if I do not live there full time? Yes, absolutely you can. Now, one thing you have to think about is where you're from, because some countries do not have reciprocity, meaning that if an Italian cannot buy a property in that country, then that country's nation cannot buy a property in Italy. And I am talking to you Canadians out there right now, because there is a ban on foreigners buying property in Canada, which means that Canadians cannot buy property in Italy, cannot buy a second home in Italy. So if you do not live here full time, you are not a permanent resident or just a resident of Italy, and you're Canadian, you will not be able to buy a house. Now, that restriction is hopefully being lifted in January of 2027. So there's still time to wait. But if you're Canadian, you can buy if you move here and you live here first, and then you can buy. There is also a problem with reciprocity with Australia, which has been in place for quite a long time. But there are some workarounds with Australia. There are not workarounds for Canada yet. So if you're from other countries, then usually, yes, it's not a problem at all. Question number 2, how long does the whole process usually take? Well, it kind of depends on how quickly you find your property that you love, or your search criteria. If, let's just say, from the time that you find the property that you love, it can take anywhere between 2 to 6 months to actually close on the deal. So we won't talk about how long it takes to find a place, because that is variable. But as soon as you do find the place you like, from the time you start the negotiations to the time you have the keys in hand, typically 2 to 6 months. And question number 3, do I really need a lawyer? Well, in short, yes, you do, but not for every single property. A property lawyer in Italy is a very valuable resource here. If you're buying very expensive property or complex property or farmland or things that are just a little off, or if you're buying privately, yes, absolutely 100%, you need to have a property lawyer help you along the process to make sure everything is buttoned down and legal. Now, if you're buying through a trusted agency, and, they know what they're doing and they're experienced, and it's a fairly simple process. Most of the time, no, you don't need a property lawyer. But in some cases, you'll need both. You'll need an agent that helps you find the property, and you'll need a property lawyer. And that means that you're going to pay commission to the agent, usually about 4%, and then you'll also pay the property lawyer. And their fees vary depending on the price of the property, but it's good to get an estimate or a quote. Now, our favorite property lawyer, of course, is Alessandro Clemente from Clemente Law Firm. And I'll put his link in our show notes so that if you need to contact him, feel free. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about visas, citizenship, property, and, well, really anything about moving to Italy that you would like me to answer in an upcoming episode, please feel free to send us a voicemail at our website at smartmoveitaly.com/podcast, or just click on the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can find all of the resources and the links to the people and the places that I mentioned in this episode inside the show notes. Ciao for now. A New Life in Italy podcast is a production of Sentire Media, created and hosted by me, Samantha Wilson. Production by London Nero, and with special thanks to Ali Frothingham, Sofia Pisana, and the entire team at Sentire. Follow A New Life in Italy wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, if you're thinking of moving to Italy, whether full-time, part-time, or for a lifetime, come and see me over at smartmoveitaly.com, and we'll help you get here and start living your best life. And don't forget, if you love this episode, please rate and leave a review. It's much appreciated. I can't wait to meet up with you again next week, same time, same place. Ciao for now.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.